Let me start with a sound. August 5th, 2026, just past midnight in Kiev. An air raid siren, then a ballistic missile warning. Inside a warehouse on the edge of the city, a shift is still running. Forklifts, pallets, cardboard boxes sliding down a conveyor belt. A warehouse worker there told the Associated Press that everyone just started running. He turned people around so nobody went back for their backpacks. Backpacks. That's the detail that stayed with me. Ordinary people at an ordinary job, deciding in seconds what is worth dying for. Minutes later, from an underground shelter, they heard the explosions. By morning, 17 people were dead across Kyiv and the surrounding region. And here's where it stops being a normal war story. Russia's defense ministry did not say it had hit soldiers, bunkers, or launchers. It said it struck 7 logistics centers, sorting hubs, distribution warehouses, places that store, in its words, dual-use goods and drone components. So let me ask you something before we go further. If drone parts sit inside a civilian warehouse, does that warehouse become a battlefield? To answer that, we have to talk about how this war is actually built. Not the front line. The supply chain sitting behind it? Think about older wars for a second. The targets were almost boring in their obviousness. Air bases, ammunition depots, tank plants, rail bridges, ports. A tank is born in a factory. A fighter jet is born in a military-industrial complex. Those places are enormous and they are impossible to hide. But a small drone? A small drone can be born almost anywhere. A workshop, a garage, a rented unit in an ordinary business park. Pull one apart and nothing inside looks exotic. A battery, a brushless motor, a camera module, a radio link, a carbon frame, fiber optic spool. Almost every one of those parts also lives in a scooter, a doorbell camera, a hobby kit. That is not a loophole. That is manufacturing. And the scale is no longer small. Ukraine's defense ministry said it signed drone contracts worth over 333 billion hryvnia in the first half of 2026, roughly double the same period a year earlier. FPV drones, the cheap first-person view kind, made up the biggest share of everything contracted. There is a marketplace where combat units order their own gear with allocated budget. The average delivery time for in-stock items is 9 days. 9 days from a soldier clicking order to a drone reaching the line. You know what makes that possible? Not a military convoy, commercial logistics. So follow the logic the way a targeting officer would. If 9-day delivery keeps the drones flying, then the delivery network is the weapon. And once you believe that, the map of what you are allowed to bomb quietly gets much bigger. Which is exactly where the law starts straining. Dual use. 2 syllables doing an enormous amount of work right now. It just means something usable for civilian purposes and for military ones. A truck can carry bread, or ammunition. A warehouse can hold toys or drone motors. A camera can film a wedding or guide a warhead. So here's the uncomfortable part. In a modern economy, what isn't dual use? Batteries, chips, GPS, trucks, ports, rail, the internet, data centers, delivery apps. Now, this surprised me. The law has no category called dual use. Under humanitarian law, an object is either a military objective or it is not. The definition lives in Article 52 of Additional Protocol 1, and honestly, it's tighter than most people assume. Let me translate it out of lawyer. Test 1. By its nature, location, purpose, or use, does the object make an effective contribution to military action? Not vague contribution. Effective contribution. Test 2. Would destroying or neutralizing it, in the circumstances ruling at that moment, offer a definite military advantage? Not possible. Not eventual. Definite. And a third piece people forget. If you genuinely doubt whether a normally civilian building is being used that way, you are supposed to presume it isn't. The Red Cross says the same thing in its customary law study. Dual-use facilities get no special track. They still have to pass that same test. So when a defense ministry says a target was dual use, that sentence is not the end of the argument. It is the beginning of one. Now watch how easily the word slides. Drone parts sit in a warehouse, so the warehouse is a target. Okay, maybe. Keep going. The courier network moves the parts. The company runs the network. Workers run the company. Taxpayers fund it all. Where exactly does this stop? If that slope sounds theoretical to you, it isn't. A country once ran that exact logic all the way to the bottom. Tokyo. 1945. March 9th, 1945. Evening. In the Shitamachi, Tokyo's low city, families are doing what families do. Dinner, homework, small children going to bed. Wooden houses, paper doors. Alleys so narrow 2 people barely pass. And tucked between the homes, thousands of tiny workshops with lathes and benches. That's the piece that matters. Japan's war production wasn't only in giant plants. Much of it was subcontracted into neighborhoods, house by house. American intelligence knew that, and they were right about it. So on a planning map, that neighborhood stopped being a neighborhood. It became a network. General Curtis LeMay had taken over the Bomber Command that January. High-altitude precision bombing had failed. Jet stream winds scattered the bombs into the sea. So he threw out the doctrine. No more daylight raids at 32,000 feet. His B-29s would come at night, and they would come low. And they would carry incendiaries instead of high explosives. Because against a city built of wood and paper, fire does what steel bombs cannot. The conditions that night were, from a targeting standpoint, perfect. Tokyo had been unusually dry. Gusts over 65 miles an hour were recorded across the city, and the city could not fight back. About 8,000 firemen, 1,000 pieces of equipment, and exactly 3 extension ladders. For all of Tokyo. 3 ladders. I read that and had to stop. Shelters were scarce too, partly because building them was thought to damage public morale. The first B-29 lifted off Guam just after 5:30 that afternoon. Over 270 more followed from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, 50 seconds apart. Sirens sounded around 10:30 at night. Most people ignored them. Tokyo had been bombed before, never like this. By 12:15, it was already too late. The lead aircraft were Pathfinders. They dropped first, and their fires marked the target for everyone behind them. A burning X across the city. Then the rest came. Over 1,665 tons of incendiaries in a single night. 14 minutes in, the firemen admitted defeat. Within an hour, the separate fires merged into one firestorm. Heat reported near 1,800 degrees. Air pulled out of streets. Window glass turning liquid. People ran toward water because water is what you run toward. At one school with a large swimming pool, the pool boiled dry by morning. I'm not going to describe what was found there. You already understand it. But I want you to hold that night for one more minute. By dawn, 16 square miles gone. More than 250,000 buildings. Over 1 million people homeless. Estimates of the dead run near 100,000. One survivor, 14 years old that night, later described a woman lying in the street, and beside her something that looked like coal. Her baby. That woman was not a factory. That baby was not a supply chain. But the logic that burned them read the whole district as production. Here's the part about Tokyo that makes people uncomfortable, and I want to handle it carefully. Japan was an aggressor empire. That is simply true. Nothing about that night erases the Bataan Death March, or Nanjing, or the war Japan chose to start. That history stays exactly where it is. But the people who burned in Shitamachi were mostly children, women, and old men asleep in wooden houses. Both of those things are true simultaneously. And listen to what the man who ordered it reportedly said. Robert McNamara recalled LeMay admitting that, had they lost, they'd have been prosecuted as war criminals. McNamara's own lesson from it was a single word: proportionality. He asked whether winning a war justifies burning 100,000 people in one night. After 1945, the world tried to write an answer down, not by banning war, by drawing lines inside it. 3 of those lines matter here. 1. Distinction. You separate military objectives from civilian objects, and you aim only at the first. You cannot treat a whole society as one machine. 2. Proportionality. Even against a lawful target, expected civilian harm cannot be excessive relative to the concrete and direct military advantage you anticipate. 3. Precautions. Before striking, you verify. You choose the timing, the weapon, the method that spares civilians. Doubt is meant to protect them, not you. And there's a 4th idea people constantly blur. Contributing to a war effort is not the same thing as taking direct part in hostilities. The Red Cross sets 3 cumulative tests for that. Does the act cross a threshold of harm? Is the causation direct? Is there a belligerent nexus? A warehouse worker sorting parcels fails all 3. So does the delivery driver. So does the person who sold the batteries. They remain civilians. That doesn't make every warehouse untouchable. If a site truly is a military objective, nearby civilians share the risk, but they never become the aim. So the honest questions about Kiev are narrow ones. Were the components really there? Was destroying the entire hub necessary? Was a less lethal option available? Now let's come back to 2026 because both sides are doing versions of this, and I want to be precise about who is doing what. Russia invaded Ukraine. That's the frame around everything else. Nothing in the next few minutes changes that, and I'm not pretending this is symmetrical. But the law of armed conflict binds every party, precisely because a civilian's protection cannot depend on which flag you happen to sympathize with. So, Russia said it hit 7 logistics centers holding dual-use goods and drone components. Reuters stated plainly that it could not independently verify that. Ukraine's list of what burned looks different. A brewery, a construction materials warehouse, a mail sorting office, a food depot, milk spilling across the floor. One retail and construction chain said missiles destroyed in minutes what it had built over decades. An employee was killed. 3 others were wounded. Now the other direction. Since July 18th, Ukrainian drones have struck at least 20 warehouses belonging to Wildberries, Russia's biggest online retailer, destroying several. Kyiv's stated reasoning: the company supplies goods the military can use, and, openly, that it wants ordinary Russians to feel this war's cost. Hold that phrase for a second. Making ordinary people feel the cost. That is not a targeting criterion in any law book. That's a description of pressure. The boundary blurs in other directions, too. A Kiev drone plant destroyed in late July turned out to be owned by a Delaware-registered American corporation. A former U.S. intelligence officer's read was blunt. Russia doesn't care who owns the plant. If it builds the weapon, it becomes a target. So here's the shape of it. Total war in 1945 burned whole cities. Drone war doesn't need to. It reclassifies the city, node by node. Logistics, energy, data, delivery, ports. Each one gets a memo explaining why it was really military all along, and the memo always sounds plausible. So let me put the question to you properly because I don't think it has a clean answer, and I've been circling it this whole time. Every war runs on an economy: roads, power, factories, workers, warehouses, data, delivery. Cut that off and armies stop. That has always been true. But if everything that helps a war can be attacked, then being a civilian means nothing. There is no ground left anywhere to stand on. That is the line the law is trying to hold. Not perfectly, not consistently. Enforcement is weak. But the line exists for a reason. Because the most dangerous sentence in war is rarely shouted. It arrives quietly, dressed as strategy, sounding reasonable. There are no innocent civilians anymore. And once a targeting room believes that, every warehouse is a battlefield. Every worker is infrastructure. Every city is eventually Tokyo in March. In Tokyo, by the way, the survivors got nothing. Courts told them citizens were expected to endure wartime suffering. Some are still asking, 80 years later. So the question of this drone age isn't who has the better weapon. It's this: how much of ordinary life are we willing to call a target? Sit with that tonight when a delivery van rolls past your window. That's a wrap for today. I'll see you next time with another thread to pull.